Chapter 17, USA by Wim Hof. I first met Eric Mazer in Los Angeles when I was invited by a Guinness World Record show to break the existing ice endurance record by half an hour. Eric was an independent documentary producer who did a lot of specials that aired on television. We had spoken a lot through email prior to meeting in person because he was interested in releasing a story on some exciting footage for Ripley's Believe It or Not. The emails were always warm and friendly, and when I arrived in LA, he offered to show me around the city. While I was in LA, I broke the record by half an hour, as I said I would, which brought the new world record to 1 hour and 34 seconds. Feeling great about my accomplishment, Eric took me out to sea to show me some great views. We saw Beverly Hills and talked about possibly working together in the future for one of his documentaries. Years later, Eric hadn't forgotten about me. I received an email from him asking if I'd be willing to come to New York City to break the existing ice endurance record. The event would take place in front of the Rubin Museum of Tibetan Art. He wanted me to be a part of a documentary that he was producing on the Iceman, me. After catching up, we began planning for New York. I'd never been to New York City before, so this would be my first time visiting the Big Apple. I was excited. When I arrived in New York, I took note of the amazing architecture. New York City is a legendary place with impressive buildings that have astonishing detail. The decorations around the city were very beautiful and inspiring. I set my amazement aside and realized that I was there for a purpose, to break the existing ice endurance record in the streets of Manhattan. An entire Dutch television team accompanied me to NYC, and together, both Eric's camera crew and the Dutch camera crew would be able to get a lot of great footage. Before the event took place, I met with the director of the museum. I also had the opportunity to meet Dr. Kenneth Kamler and Professor William Buchel. The Rubin Museum of Art and the Today Show hired both individuals for special interviews. Together, they were going to enlighten the audience on my ability to withstand the extreme cold. Ken Kamler, who had recently published a book entitled Surviving the Extremes, was the main speaker during the world record attempt and would be helping to monitor my vitals. He would also be narrating the event to the people watching in the streets and at home in front of their televisions. William Buchel, or Bill as I call him, is a well-established professor who received his PhD in anthropology. Through a lot of research, he remains connected to the Tibet House. He is most well known for his research on how esoteric Eastern disciplines can affect the Western society. He's attempting to differentiate between the two societies with hopes to find insights that will benefit humanity. Very soon after meeting William, he gave me an extensive booklet exemplifying scientific data related to his research. I really felt honored. Bill, hey, if you're reading this, thank you. 2 days after my arrival, I was asked to do a demonstration for the Today Show. Everything was set up in front of the studio, and it was a cold morning in New York, and there was quite a lot of wind in the streets. Before stepping into the Perspex box, I did an interview in my shorts. When I got into the box, they filled it up with 700 kilograms, 1,543 pounds of ice. Bystanders were in awe as they watched a normal guy subject himself to extremely cold temperatures. After 40 minutes passed, they opened the box and frozen chunks of ice fell to the ground. I did one last interview with a man who claimed that I was a human popsicle, and then I went into a nearby building to take a nice, warm shower. Later that day, we did more filming in Madison Square. After we finished filming, we all went for a drink to warm ourselves up in a nearby Havana bar. There, I saw myself televised on a big screen TV. I was famous in New York. Since I would be attempting to break the world record at 2 p.m. sharp the following day, we all went back to the hotel and found our own rooms. I wanted to get a good night's sleep before the world record attempt. The next morning, we all had to wake up and go right to a meeting. The Dutch camera team and Eric's camera team were both present. To our surprise, a third camera team had shown up as well. It was a crew from ABC News wanting to do a documentary entitled Medical Mysteries. As if 3 television teams weren't enough, 15 other stations ended up showing up at the ice endurance record attempt in Manhattan. There were people everywhere. Representatives from countries all over the world had been sent to film my event so that it could be internationally broadcasted. Meanwhile, I just kept to myself and did what I always do. I prepared mentally and focused on the task at hand. In the final moments before preparation for the world record attempt, cameras surrounded the area and took their final positions. I stepped into the Perspex box and I was ready to go. Dr. Kenneth Kamler's future girlfriend, Grana Stewart, hooked me up with some sensors which would be monitoring my vitals. Soon enough, a team of people poured ice all around me. They poured the ice in until it reached up past my shoulders. It was at this point that they started the large digital clock which would display the elapsed time. Dr. Kamler and his assistant Granis checked my blood pressure every 5 minutes to monitor my vitals. They also checked my core temperature and my heartbeat. At one point, my core temperature decreased a little, but never to a dangerous extent. Things were under control. I didn't need the monitors to tell me how my body was doing. I could feel and understand everything that was happening. I know the dangers of hypothermia, and I can control my body so it doesn't get to that point. The bystanders witnessed a man in control. The director of the museum explained this Westerner is controlling his inner core temperature by using a Tibetan technique called tumo. This is also known as inner fire. To maintain control over the core temperature, you must influence the body by steering the hypothalamus. You can think of the hypothalamus as the thermostat in our brain. The veins around the core need to remain perfectly closed in order to maintain a 37 degrees Celsius, 98.6 degree Fahrenheit body temperature. The blood needs to stay at that temperature to prevent hypothermia and to keep the liver, lungs, heart, and brain from shutting down. While the skin temperature may fall to 0 degrees Celsius, 32 degrees Fahrenheit, the core can maintain the proper blood temperature to stay alive. At this point, the body can generate heat 3 times as much as it does when in stasis. Researchers have suggested that because of my cold training, I'm able to control the autonomic nervous system to a certain degree. Normally, people are unable to directly influence the autonomic nervous system, but with proper training, it becomes possible. I am convinced that anyone can learn to do it. This is exactly what I did throughout the record attempt. I remained in control. At the 50-minute mark, I briefly sensed something strange going on in one of my kidneys. It felt cold. Focusing on that spot, I redirected the blood flow to provide heat to my kidney. Within minutes, the sensors in that area detected a remarkable increase of 10 degrees Celsius, 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Needless to say, it was warm again. After that, Kamler watched a steady line as my core temperature stayed the same. He also watched as my heart rate went up a little. In order to maintain the blood's temperature, the heart rate must go up to warm the body. With that being said, the heart rate is something that should be carefully monitored to make sure that the situation doesn't become life threatening. If my heart rate had exceeded 200 beats per minute, we would have immediately stopped the record attempt. Luckily, my heart rate never rose above 130 beats per minute. Even at 130 beats per minute, I was still able to generate enough heat and energy to circulate around my body to keep it warm. I looked at the large digital clock to see how much time had elapsed. There was only 1 minute left until I would set the new record. As the last 10 seconds approached, the crowd yelled in unison 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I broke out of the box and threw my arms up in the air in triumph. I did it! After a nice, warm bath, I did an interview with Ken Kamler in front of the audience. It was quite the presentation. The news of my new world record traveled quickly throughout the media and all around the world. That evening, people even recognized me as I was walking down the streets in New York. It was a surreal feeling, being a celebrity. I'd seen a lot of television programs in my life, but now I felt like I was a part of it. I dared again and didn't meet failure. My confidence took a step forward and I was ready for more. After my successful record, someone arranged a meeting for me to meet with Dr. Kevin Tracy of Feinstein Institute of Manhasset, New York. Apparently, Dr. Tracy was extremely interested in performing research to see if I could influence the immune system. I didn't know what to expect, but before I knew it, we were in a subway on our way to Manhasset. It was about 35 kilometers, 27.9 miles away. On the ride over, I had a very interesting discussion with Professor Bushell, a modest gentleman who's extremely dedicated to science. Bill and I spoke of the potential benefits of cold exposure and how it could help individuals of the Western society. Many diseases are caused by bad circulation, which can be extremely uncomfortable. We discussed many ways that the cold exposure could possibly help alleviate the problem. Bill and I shared many similar beliefs and ways of thinking. It was a good conversation for the ride to Manhasset. After getting off the subway, we jumped on a bus, and before long, we arrived at the front gates of the Feinstein Institute. As we were entering the institute, the employees informed us that it was prohibited to record anything during our visit. We said we understood, and they led us to a large conference room where 12 individuals were seated around a large table. After all the introductions, I began telling the group about my vision of how using the cold correctly could greatly benefit humanity. They were all interested in what I had to say, so they listened attentively. From the conference room, we all went down to the testing room, where I sat in a cozy chair connected to a lung monitor and cardiogram. During the test, they actually had to switch out the lung monitor twice because they thought it wasn't working properly. When a lung monitor doesn't sense any air or breaths at all, it reads the person connected as dead, and I went without breath for longer than 2.5 minutes. After switching to the third monitor, I figured it'd be best to stop my breathing exercises. Dr. Tracy's team was also interested in watching my body work at the cellular level, so they extracted blood before, during, and after my experiment. The biochemical specialists planned to identify and compare 310 different blood values from the 3 samples. After we finished the testing, we thanked Kevin Tracy and his team of specialists for the invitation. We made our way back to the entrance where the bus was waiting for us. We said goodbye and returned to New York City. Just as soon as we had returned to New York City, we had to leave again. We flew from JFK Airport in Queens to St. Paul, Minnesota. As I mentioned a while ago, ABC News was shooting a documentary entitled Medical Mysteries, and this was where the filming would be taking place. When we touched down in St. Paul, you could see how cold it was outside by looking through the plane's windows. Everything looked icy and there was snow everywhere. The temperature read negative 30 degrees Celsius, 22 degrees Fahrenheit. It was like I was in Lapland again. It was so cold that the local elementary and high schools were canceled because of the weather. My hotel room was on the 26th floor, surrounded by skyscrapers. It's what you'd expect from a popular city. I got some sleep, and the next morning, the camera crew knocked on my door and asked if I would mind if they did some filming. I told them, of course not. That's why we're here, isn't it? The camera team started their filming by having me do some meditative postures. I also did some breathing exercises and some physical exercises. They got some good footage, and it also helped me prepare for the rest of the day. And out of nowhere, Joe Anger, who was leading the team, sporadically had me go outside. He wanted me to mingle with the public out in the snowy weather, in my shorts, so that he could record me asking people questions about the cold just to gather their opinions. We recorded and interviewed with people all day long at the university, in the streets, and in the parks. At the end of the day, we took a car to Duluth, Minnesota. There, we met up with two world-renowned medical professors. They wanted to perform a cold experiment to measure the physiological changes in my body. When we arrived in Duluth, we checked in to a cozy hotel and found our rooms. At the hotel, we were greeted by one of the professors who would be performing the experiment. He seemed like a nice guy, and I was excited for the experiment to come. After a good night's rest, we traveled to the medical school where the professor taught. We met in a laboratory that specifically studied the cold's effects on the body. In the lab, the camera crew poured some ice into a basin full of cold water. They hoped the ice would exaggerate how cold the water was so that people at home would see that the water was truly freezing. Filming can be a challenge sometimes. It really can test your patience with the amount of time that it takes to set up the equipment, to get the proper shots, and take down the equipment. Well, that's television. Finally, the cold experiment was ready. They hooked me up to all kinds of wires in order to monitor my vitals in the cold water. Once again, while getting into the freezing water, I had no gasping reflex. As time progressed, my core temperature and my heart rate stayed the same. It looked like it would be another successful experiment. When we finished the experiment, the researchers were more than happy with the results and indeed declared the experiment a success. We then flew back to New York, pleased with our accomplishment. After arriving, we went to the frozen shore off of the Hudson River to do a little more filming. We were happy with the footage we captured there, so we were able to relax for a bit. A strenuous week had gone by, and we had all done extremely well. When I got back from Minnesota, I was anxious to receive a call from Ken Kamler with the results from Dr. Kevin Tracy's experiments. Kamler finally called and informed me that even though Dr. Tracy was typically a very docile and calm man, he literally jumped in the air when he saw the results. The results showed that I had suppressed the inflammatory marked bodies in the nervus vagus. This meant that I had consciously influenced my immune system, something widely seen as impossible. If one's able to influence the immune system by will, it could potentially have an enormous impact on humanity for the fight against disease. So from that point on, my new mission in life was to help people fight disease. Half an hour later, after receiving the good news, I received a phone call from my wife with some very heartbreaking news. She informed me that my mother had just passed away. And with this news, it took me back to the story of my birth. Many years ago, when my mother was pregnant with my brother and I, the doctors actually had no idea that she was carrying twins. After my mother gave birth to my brother, Andre, the doctors took her to a recovery room thinking she could relax. And once there, though, she sensed that there was another baby on the way. The contractions were strong and my mother screamed for help. The nurse came to check on my mother and she too was convinced that another baby was on the way. The nurse ran back to get the doctor as well as another nurse. Altogether, they pushed the bed to the operating room where they would attempt to do a cesarean section. My mother was extremely hesitant of this kind of delivery due to some of the things that she had heard about in the past, but it was too late now. As a consistent churchgoer and a devoted Catholic, she prayed that her child would make it out alive and eventually become a missionary. Before they could even get my mother on the operating table, she delivered the baby. By sheer will and strength, she was able to deliver her second twin, me. This is how I came into the world. And now, my mother was gone. When I heard the sad news, it felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. I was breathless. There was a hole in my heart. There are no coincidences. Everything happens for a reason. It connects us to those that we love and can provide peace in our heart. In this sad moment, I tried to be strong and carry on with my new mission in life.